There's a simple word for showing up: citizenship. I'm not talking about documentation status, papers, and passports. I mean this deeper sense of, do you show up for your community?
Welcome to Aspen Ideas Show Up. My name is Zinhle Essamuah. I am a correspondent at NowThis and the host of NowThis, a daily news show.
And I'm Eric Liu. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Citizen University and the director of the Aspen Institute's program on citizenship and American identity.
Show up. Show up.
We're going to guess that if you've made it here tonight, it's because you care about our democracy and want to engage in the process.
But this isn't just a get out the vote effort. We're not trying to convince you that all you need to do is to show up at the polls.
We think that is the very least you can do, and that democracy takes work. But that work is empowering and joyful and can be a part of your everyday life.
Show up.
And we're going to talk about how to have better arguments. Yes, more arguments, but less stupid ones. Ones where we can actually learn from and understand one another.
We're going to talk about protest, why it works, because we've witnessed that it does, and how the most effective protests are often thoughtful and planned, but also exuberant and emotional.
And we're going to talk about what happens both before and after Election Day. Elections may seem like national do-or-die moments, but the reality is that democracy lives or dies depending on how we show up 365 days a year. Part of showing up is showing folks where you stand. Sometimes that means taking a risk. This year, we've seen a wave of professional athletes taking a stand for racial justice. We're going to hear now from two such athletes about how they've chosen to use their power to include more folks into the promise of our country.
Hi, I'm John Frankel, correspondent with HBO's Real Sports with Bryant Gumbel. I'm moderating a brief conversation with Candace Parker, the 2008 number one overall pick in the WNBA, and who also made the All-WNBA's first team this year. And we're also joined by Chris Conley, wide receiver with the Jacksonville Jaguars, who in 2015 was a third-round pick originally by the Kansas City Chiefs, and plays wide receiver again today with Jacksonville. Both of you, Candace and Chris, thank you for making time to join us today. Let's start with a big picture. Where do you think Black Lives Matters today? Where is this movement going at this point?
Well, I think this summer, a lot of us in the sports community were able to kind of really talk about things going in, obviously with the quarantine and sports starting again. NBA took a pause, WNBA started late, NFL is just starting back up, and it was able for us to kind of take a look at our platform and how it can affect change and how we can move forward with this movement along with sports, who in all of our sports, it's dominated by African Americans. And so I think this summer, especially going in, playing sports, going back to sports, we made that a priority to have conversations and to put those conversations and back them with action.
Chris, the Milwaukee Bucks took a stand when, during the course of the NBA playoffs, they decided that they wanted to protest and not play. When Candace and others talk about having a platform, is it important to be on the stage, to be performing, to be playing in order to have the platform, or is it better to step away?
There can be arguments that are made for both cases, and you can see some people's platforms are larger when they step off of the court or the field, and other people can grab the attention of the world while they're on that court or field. And so I think it's a little bit less about when and where, and it's more about just using it at any opportunity. We've had guys who have tried to step off of the field. We had people stand in solidarity with the Bucks and decide that they weren't going to practice or they weren't going into their buildings that day to make their statement. So I think there's different opportunities for that in the world of sports, and it varies by person.
Candace, the WNBA seems to be fairly unified in its approach and its response. Do you think that's an accurate assessment compared to some of the other leagues, particularly the NFL?
I do believe that the WNBA has been unified in their approach to social justice and always has been. This isn't something new that has happened. We don't shy away from acknowledging that we are a female league. We are all women, 80% African American, part of the LGBTQ. You talk about different social economic backgrounds. I mean, we are the majority of the minority. And I do believe that it is our responsibility as the WNBA to continue to have those voices and to continue to get out into the communities. And we always have. And that made me really proud to be a part of solidarity, as Chris talked about. We stood with our brothers and they stood with us. This whole season has been dedicated to the Say Her Name campaign. Say Her Name. There are so many women, Black women, that have been killed with police brutality. And this season, we dedicated this season to acknowledging that, to bringing attention and awareness to that.
Chris, do you look on with a bit of envy, given that your league perhaps has not been quite as unified? I mean, the NBA joined the Milwaukee Bucks in shutting down the league when they wanted to protest. Even from the beginning, Colin Kaepernick back in 2016, there were different opinions in the NFL about how people should act. So are you a little bit jealous?
I would use a different word probably than jealous. But I think that the efforts of athletes in the NBA and the WNBA, such as Candace and her teammates, they really give fuel to people like me to come into our buildings and say, hey, we're not doing enough. Hey, we're not being bold enough in the face of pushback. We're not being bold enough in the face of financial threat or threats from fans. Because at the end of the day, look at who's in this locker room. And you have people from all walks of life, but you have large and predominantly African-American players, coaches, and communities. And these people are crying out right now and wanting people to champion their voice. And I think that the NFL has been slow to respond. I think that players in different situations can be reluctant to step up and use their voice. I remember back in 2016 and 2017, the climate in locker rooms and the fear that was going around, that guys just really wanted to hold on to their jobs. And I think this time around, you have more of those guys recognizing, hey, I didn't do enough, and hey, I didn't step up enough. And so it's beginning to grow. But as anything in the NFL, it always is slow. And at the end of the day, there's a lot of pushback because the league is all about money. And so the league will push back if they feel like their money is being threatened in any way. But we as players have to see beyond that. We have to be able to be brave beyond what could happen to our jobs or our financial state.
I think what I hear you saying is something that you've said before, which is some of the bigger names, some of those players who might not be susceptible to getting cut. The LeBron James, if you will, of the NFL need to step forward and speak up.
Yes, I completely agree with that, because at the end of the day, if they get tired of me, they can cut Chris Conley and move on. And the league will not blink. And that's just the way that this machine of the NFL is set up. But there are a couple of cogs in that machine that are irreplaceable. And the more that those guys go out and they use their voices, they push back against the pushback, the more traction will happen. You see guys like Patrick Mahomes starting to speak up more now. And when Patrick Mahomes speaks, the league listens. And if we can get people with that kind of weight behind their name to really push more for substantial and measurable change, then you'll start to see the league actually move quicker.
Candace, the WNBA has been engaged in this with you, as again the NBA was with the Milwaukee Bucks. How important is that? And maybe you can address this. In a certain way, did the NBA steal the narrative from the Milwaukee Bucks? I liken it to, do you lock the players out or do they strike? And then who gets to control the storyline? Did it hurt that the NBA sort of sided with the Milwaukee Bucks and shut down the playoffs at that point for a couple days?
I don't think it hurt at all. I think being on the same page and being on the same team. I know Adam Silver personally, and ever since he's been commissioner, it seems as though there's an open dialogue and there's conversation and there's communication. It's bringing others to the table that may not have the same viewpoints or background or similar stories as you do. And as long as we get to that point within all leagues across the board, and we're able to conversate and have conversations and bring other people to the table, I think we're all going to get accomplished what we want to accomplish. And to further causes, this is about Black Lives Matter, but this is about equality. All in all. And it's not yours, it's not mine, it's ours. And until we get to that point, then we're just going to be speaking words. And so I think the NBA is doing a good job of creating actionable change, charities, things that you can get involved with, social change fund, vote. LeBron has been huge with voter suppression. So as long as we're doing actionable items to help raise awareness and to help equality, I think we're on the same page and on the same team.
Chris, I know that you're involved in an effort called Getting the Game, and that's about getting the vote out. But you've also said that voting doesn't change everything. Tell me what you mean by that. And we don't have a ton of time, but how much does the history of all of this that's happened in this country play into what's going on today?
You know, you look at so many of, I call them the symptoms of our country's history. And all of these things are symptoms of a long 400-year history of our country. And if you take away that context, then you're basically saying that these things would happen anyway, regardless of that history. And so when I say that voting doesn't solve everything, it doesn't. You have years and years and years of communities that have been neglected, people that have been terrorized, disenfranchised, and simple votes and propositions, they're good and they're a start, but they don't bring complete and total healing. And so there's so many different issues that you have to address to really clear up all of these symptoms. And we really need to come at it realizing the context of that history and looking at it from so many different angles. Voting is a piece. Voter suppression wouldn't be happening if it wasn't a big deal. So obviously the vote is important, but there's so many other ways that these people, my people, our people, I say our people because we're all Americans and we're all humans, but there's so many other ways that these communities have been put down, and we can't just focus on one way and think that it's going to solve everything.
Candace Parker, Chris Conley, I know that you appreciate the fact that people tune in to watch you for your physical skills, but it must be nice at this point to know that people are also listening to you and hearing what you're having to say about being civically engaged. Again, Candace Parker, Chris Conley, thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it.
Aspen Ideas Show Up is a collaboration between NowThis and the Aspen Institute. NowThis creates news content for the social, mobile generation by informing its audience about what's happening and important in the world right now, while the Aspen Institute drives change through dialogue, leadership, and action to help solve the greatest challenges of our time. This next segment is from the NowThis library featuring Brothers Osborne.
The talking point from a lot of pro-gun rights activists is if you outlaw guns, only outlaws will have guns. I think good law-abiding citizens that want to protect themselves should have the right to have that. But at the same time, we need to make it harder for outlaws not to get them.
We're not anti-gun at all.
I'm not anti-gun. I mean, I have guns in this house that we're in right now. It makes me feel I can sleep well at night having that. But at the same time, the way that gun laws are right now makes me extremely uneasy. And I think it makes a lot of people uneasy. And I think there's some very common sense gun laws that need to be put in place that I think most people agree with, even conservative people.
Yeah.
And nothing is being done about it.
A good guy with a gun can stop a bad guy with a gun. And so, which means it's a great phrase to use, but we have to do everything we can to make sure that a bad guy doesn't end up with a gun.
This is an all-red country. Granddaddy's gun.
Keep that pistol in the drawer.
And I'll be up all night, still cleaning this gun.
Then people are constantly saying, you know, well, you'll be Dixie chicked, which I think is really funny that it has turned into a verb. And I mean, I love the Dixie chicks. Yeah, you can Dixie chick us anytime you want. I think they're awesome. But that's just who we are. We're going to say what we think, whether you like it or not, whether it's detrimental to our careers. We don't care. I mean, the right to own a gun is very important. It's literally the Second Amendment. That's how important it is. But the only amendment that beats that is the First Amendment, our right to speak.
Probably hurt us more than help us, and that's how passionate I am about it. That's how much I think change needs to happen, that I'm willing to sacrifice fans for that. I'm willing to sacrifice money for that.
We grew up in a small town, and, you know, which involved, you know, beer, trucks, girls, and guns, you know, and that's fine. That's great. But you can't look at country music and go, well, that's all it's about. You know, that's just one sliver of it. There's so much more to it than that. There's a line somewhere, and it's constantly moving, and we have to find out where that line is, and we can't let trigger words like universal background check scare us, because it's not scary. No one's taking anything away. We're just trying to keep people safe. Personally, I don't think AR-15s are necessary to have, right? We don't need them. They're not great for hunting. You know, if we spend no time talking about mental health and we pump a bunch of time and money into protecting guns, that's just a recipe for disaster. So I think those two things alone can really solidify the line that where I believe it needs to be and keep all of us as safe as possible. We are the United States, and we've never been more divided. I don't think we can get to a place of any constructive conversation, or we can't get to a place of common sense gun reform if we can't even literally talk about it.
I think a lot of country performers have really prided themselves on being pretty outspoken and being very honest people and speaking ultimately for the little guy. And you know, and I think that's something that we still try to do, even though sometimes we have a difference of opinion.
The most American thing you can ever do is speak your mind proudly.
It's easier to forge a path of showing up when you see people who've done it before us in a monumental way. Here's a tribute to a trailblazer who shows us all the way.
You know about John Lewis, civil rights leader and congressman. He was someone who showed up. When he was just a student and the civil rights movement was just beginning, he showed up to organize. When lunch counters didn't seat Black customers, he showed up, resisted, and sat down to eat. When buses enforced segregated seating, he showed up and he chose his seat. When thousands gathered to march against injustice, he showed up, led people over that bridge and to Washington. He was beat up by police, surveilled and monitored. He got arrested more than 40 times in the 60s alone, but he kept showing up and leading more and more people to show up themselves until their right to show up was recognized and protected. And then he moved from lunch counters and bus stations and into government, from City Hall to Washington to finally the House of Representatives. But still, whenever there was a march or a protest or a way he could amplify the voice of his people, he showed up. And he showed up every day until the day he died. He's remembered as a hero, as a trailblazer, and he did so much to make this country a better, more equitable place. And it all started when he woke up one morning when he was just a young man and decided to show up.
Social distancing doesn't have to mean civic isolation. Here are 5 ways that even in the time of COVID, especially in the time of COVID, you can creatively show up, connect with others, and remind each other that we are not alone right now. How to show up when you can't go out. Right now, it's really easy just to check out, to doom scroll, to hide away until maybe soon it'll all blow over. But while staying home may be in some ways a virtue, hiding at home isn't good for you or for society. In the weirdness of this year, at least we do have virtual spaces to gather, and coming together is what keeps society going. Here now are some ways to stay involved, even when you're staying home. Number 1, get local. You probably won't get a chance to ask a question at a presidential town hall, but you can at your town's town hall. Local candidates are zooming all over. Policymakers and police chiefs and park rangers all want to connect. Colleges and museums are offering lectures and discussions. Historians and psychologists helping us to make sense of this moment. So log on and become a better local citizen. But then don't forget step number 2, fact check yourself. Your neighborhood social media group probably isn't the best source of information unless it's about trash pickup. Even while you're drowning in news and opinion and gossip and posts and memes, take some time to step away and figure out what's accurate. Misinformation, whether deliberate or accidental, whether meant to deceive or uplift, it's everywhere. So try to get to the source of the story, to learn the facts before you pass judgment, or pass your judgment or that story on to others. To get the facts, of course, you need to do our 3rd step, which is support news media. Yes, the internet wants to be free, but journalists, they need to be paid. Subscribe to the organizations doing the best journalistic work. And don't forget your local papers and radio stations. Think about how much time you spend reading news and pay for it appropriately. Then, number 4, vote on everything. It's easy to get caught up in the big races, the national races, but the bottom of the ballot is where so much change begins and where the leaders of tomorrow emerge. A city council seat could impact your life at least as much as a US Senate race, and so could a ballot initiative, a charter amendment, or a judgeship. And then think beyond the ballot. Politicians listen to polls and surveys, and they read the online comments about bike trails and zoning laws. So take a survey and take a stand. And when you're done, go to number 5. Give. Give your time however you can. Give it to the causes you care about, doing things you enjoy, so you'll look forward to the time you give. If you don't have the time, be a good checking account citizen. Help feed the hungry. Buy school supplies for kids. House the homeless. Support ballot initiatives. Plant trees. You can also give time and money, of course, by buying tickets to virtual events like plays and concerts to help artists and organizations make it through some very tough times. Even in quarantine, it's easy to show up. Just like you've made a habit out of washing your hands and wearing your mask, you can make a habit out of caring and a habit out of giving. You can make a habit out of thinking critically and acting civically. Make a habit out of engaging with your fellow Americans when it's easy and when it's hard. One day soon, we will be hugging and dancing and crowding into public spaces again. But in the meantime, we've got to keep our society healthy. Luckily, we don't need to wait for a vaccine to help build civic health. All we have to do is open our minds, open our hearts, and keep on choosing to show up. And now, a special message from award-winning actor, producer, and activist, America Ferrera.
Hi there, it's America Ferrera. Thank you so much to Aspen Ideas and NowThis for having me here to talk about She Se Puede. She Se Puede is a new digital lifestyle community and a media platform that inspires, affirms, and informs Latinas to leverage our power in a way that transforms our lives, our families, and our community. She Se Puede will help build a culture of confidence and empowerment in all aspects of Latinas' lives, because we know that when a Latina is confident in her power, she will stand up to change her community and her country, and she'll bring her friends and her family along with her. She Se Puede is the destination for the modern Latina looking to be seen and to be celebrated. We curate content on health, parenting, food, fashion, culture, and civic engagement. Our lifestyle content is shared across web, social, email, and text platforms. She Se Puede's content celebrates the experiences and the dreams of Latinas, and it provides tools we need to own our own power. Everybody loves to talk about the Latino numbers, how fast our community is growing, and the potential for our impact on everything from elections to corporate bottom lines. But we know the numbers on their own don't mean anything. Demography is not destiny. Unless we begin to build a culture that allows Latinas to see our power, to believe in our power, and to act on that power, we will never see the full force of our potential in this country. We have to remind ourselves and each other that our democracy only works for us if we show up. Getting ourselves to show up and re-energizing people who have been on the margins for so long is the work we all have to be doing to save our democracy right now. Because power is so obviously concentrated in the hands of institutions that have been in power for a very, very long time.
Aspen Ideas Show Up is generously underwritten by the Bezos Family Foundation.
Civic engagement is a long game, and someone who has been in the game for a long time is a self-described original gangsta granny. Join her in conversation about stepping outside your bubble to build community.
My name is Madonna Thunderhawk, and I live on the Cheyenne River Sioux Reservation in South Dakota. Those are my people.
Madonna Thunderhawk is a Lakota matriarch, an organizing force behind every modern Native occupation, from Wounded Knee in 1973 to Standing Rock in 2016. She was radicalized in the late 1960s and became a force of nature within the American Indian movement. She co-founded the We Will Remember Survival School, Women of All Red Nations, and the Black Hills Alliance. A powerful voice for Native resistance and sovereignty, Madonna has spoken around the world as part of a global movement for Indigenous rights, serving as a delegate to the United Nations, and is the matriarch behind the Warrior Women Project, a collective for the development of scholarship, media, and activism. She is the original gangster granny. My name is Beth Castle, and I'm a community scholar and filmmaker. Just recently, she and I caught up on Lakota land to discuss the importance of voting and advice for a younger generation.
If there was one thing you'd really like to see the young people who are on the rise right now, what might that be?
The value of allies, because no group of people, whether it's an age group or whether it's an ethnic group, cannot stand alone. So allies are so very important, and you start building those on a local level. It's got to start with community.
When you're asking people to think of community, what are you asking them to think
Extended family, because I'm finding out English words are very limited, but outside of my people, extended family is very important, and that's the glue that holds us together. And because of extended families can be anywhere, all over the country. I mean, I have extended family all over this land, It's another word for community. And maybe the rest of America has to relearn that.
The interactive sessions start at 8 p.m. Eastern Time and are not to be missed. There are multiple topics to choose from, and you can still register at aspenideas.info/register. There is Advocacy Today, Lessons from the Civil Rights Movement, an interactive webinar with 2 Stanford University professors that will share key stories from that movement, highlighting how those past events established the blueprint for today's campaigns for racial justice. There's Bridges That Last, strategies for rallying bipartisan coalitions. Young politicians from both parties will talk about building effective, long-lasting coalitions to help push legislation across the finish line. And then last but definitely not least is Youth to Power, Your Voice and How to Use It. Jamie Margolin, an award-winning youth activist and co-founder of the global climate action movement Zero Hour, provides a roadmap for organizers who are looking to take impact from the streets to the ears of policymakers. Tonight's interactive sessions continue starting at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Register at aspenideas.info/register. Space is still available to join a webinar titled Tools of Citizenship from the Constitution, hosted by Jeff Rosen, CEO of the National Constitution Center. Together, you'll explore the freedoms that framers crafted to effectively engage in shaping our democracy.
If you're not as trusting of organizations and structures as you used to be, you're not alone. Our country is in a serious trust deficit. People have stopped believing that institutions of all kinds are legitimate. Well, our next discussion is going to focus on what it takes to remedy that and repair trust in each other and in our institutions.
Hello, my name is David Brooks. I am a columnist at the New York Times and the chair of Weave, the Social Fabric Project at the Aspen Institute. And I'm joined by my good friend Yuval Levin. Yuval is head of social, cultural, and constitutional studies at the American Enterprise Institute. He edits a magazine, a very great magazine called National Affairs, and he's the author of this fine book, Time to Build. Yuval, we've both written a lot about institutions. We're at a time where people have lost faith in them. But your book is built around an interesting distinction between, well, describe to us the distinction you make in the book.
Well, sure. Thank you, David. It's great to be with you. The book argues about the sources of some of our loss of trust in institutions. And among the primary sources lately has been a sense that people within some of our major institutions have lost the sense of what those institutions are for. So that rather than seeing them as formative of them, as shaping their character and giving them a responsibility, a role, a place, they see those institutions as performative, as places to stand and put on a show in the larger cultural theater of American political and cultural life. And so they see them as platforms for themselves. And you can see that in our politics, you can see it in the business world, you can see it in the academy, in the media. Institutions that are being used as platforms by the people within them are just harder to trust.
Yeah, now I could see how, we all know what performative looks like. I know a lot of people who run for the Senate so they can get on TV or so they can write books. But what does it look like to be formed by an institution?
You know, it looks like understanding yourself through the role that you have. So you might say there's such a thing in the world, say, as an attorney or an accountant. And it's pretty easy to say when someone is behaving in a way that is very unaccountant-like, right? And you can very easily sort of tell, well, that's not what that person is supposed to be doing in this situation. I think in a lot of our institutions now, we've lost the sense that, say, there is such a thing in the world as a member of Congress, someone who thinks of themselves as a legislator, rather than, for example, as a cable TV news personality. That distinction has pretty much been lost in our political life now. And I think increasingly in a lot of ways you see that with journalism too, where people are trying to build their own brand rather than see themselves as operating within an institution, within a profession, under a set of guidelines and rules. The purpose of those rules is not just to constrain them, it's to empower them, to enable them to have a claim on our trust. And when they step out of those boundaries, it's much harder for them to make that claim.
Yeah, and I would say for young people, there's just a lot more insecurity today because of the failure of institutions, and because of the failure sometimes of each other. You know, the thing that worries me most is not even trust in institutions, but trust in each other. And if you ask people a generation ago, are most people trustworthy? 60% said yeah. And baby boomers, older people, still sort of have that sense. But growing up in a much more insecure world, a world where basically history has let you down, people under 30, only 19% say people around them are trustworthy. 70% say, you know, most people are selfish and out for themselves. That's just, the world looks like a more dangerous place, I think, for a lot of people.
The striking thing about that, too, is that if you look at some just objective measures of well-being in our society, it's not actually that easy to explain why that has happened. So people are as healthy as ever. Our economy was doing okay before the crisis and will be doing okay after the pandemic. Some basics of sort of well-being seem to be all right. But yet, as you say, people have this sense that we're divided, we're broken, you can't trust people on the other side, whatever the other side might mean. There's not a sense that we're all in this together. And I think that that's as much a symptom as a driver of a loss of confidence in institutions. there's just not this sense that we are one whole society that's engaged in one common life. There's increasingly a sense that we're teams, we're clans against each other, and so you can't trust that people who aren't on your team are somehow on your side in some other way. And it matters, if your doctor votes the way you do, or if your employer does, in ways that just wouldn't have been a question in prior generations. And so I think these things are just related. The polarization of our national life has a lot to do with the reason why people don't feel like the institutions are there for them.
I just did this story for the Atlantic on trust, and I asked all these social scientists, like, okay, how do you rebuild trust once it's gone? And they weren't much help. They were like, yeah, we don't really know because we haven't really seen that. Do you have a sense of how you rebuild trust?
It's an enormous challenge. It's not easy to say how a society can reverse the trends we've lived through, but I think thinking about them in terms of reversing probably isn't quite right. We have to think about them in terms of building. From where we are now, what do we need to be building so that we can get to a place where we have some more social trust? I think the key to that, and really the key to being hopeful about America in general, is to look at our country from the bottom up and not from the top down. We're not going to be able to start by building political trust. We're not going to be able to start by fixing Congress. I think you start by helping people to work together on problems that are near at hand. And if you're looking for examples of where communities have come back together, it's been around very practical problems where people have had trouble getting enough food during the pandemic, or people have had trouble integrating immigrants within an urban setting. And you can see people sort of coming together and figuring out how to solve that problem. If you want to see government working, you have to look at the local level, then maybe some states, and then think about how Washington can change. And I think that's just the direction to think about when we try to think about rebuilding trust.
Okay, well, it's been a pleasure to see you, Yuval.
Thanks very much.
Sir.
Aspen Ideas Show Up is generously underwritten by the Bezos Family Foundation.
And now more content to get you fired up to show up.
How to have better arguments. Sometimes it seems like the whole world is arguing, and that things would be better if we could just stop. But what if the real problem isn't that we're arguing too much, but that we're arguing the wrong way? Arguments, after all, are how people in society negotiate disagreement. They're our best tool for spelling out different viewpoints, for considering common goals. If we take a better approach to the way we're arguing, we may find they are the best way to bring us together. So what does a better argument look like? Probably not much like your last one. Here are 5 ground rules. Number 1, take winning off the table. The goal of a better argument is to understand, not win. Nothing gets solved if we're just having a fight. Number 2, prioritize relationships and listen passionately. Start by connecting with the people you're talking with. Better arguments happen when people pay real attention to what other people are saying, not just to look for points to argue against later. Number 3, pay attention to context. Every argument exists within a cultural context. You'll understand more if you start by asking about the history of the issue and the communities it affects. Number 4, embrace vulnerability. In any argument, you should enter in with the possibility of having your own mind changed, and also your heart. You should enter with a willingness to admit your own doubt and fear and pain, so others might respond honestly and openly. Number 5, make room to transform. Since you don't have to win, what's the goal of an argument? Well, nothing less than transformation of yourself and how you engage with others. You can't possibly change someone else's mind if you're not willing to have your own mind changed and transformed. In the end, when we talk about having a better argument, we're talking about managing our differences with each other so that we can find solutions to the problems we're facing together. To find out more about how to have better arguments, have one. And to do that, visit betterarguments.org for tools, skills, free workshops, and resources.
And now another great example of someone showing up.
My name is Aalayah Eastmond, and I'm a co-founder of Concerned Citizens DC, as well as the administrator for Team Enough. My journey to activism started by a senseless act of gun violence when a fellow student opened fire in my class in Parkland, Florida. I laid beneath the lifeless body of my classmate Nicholas Tourette as bullets riddled my classmates, but I am not the first in my family to be affected by gun violence. My uncle Patrick Edwards was gunned down in the streets of Brooklyn, New York at the age of 18, just months after being beaten by NYPD, who deemed his black body in a white neighborhood a threat. Gun violence extends beyond the path of a bullet and creates multi-generational cycles of poverty as well as social and economic injustices. We have had enough of gun violence, and we've had enough of police tactics that continue to brutalize and traumatize our communities. Concerned Citizens DC created a Bill of Rights for a New America, because we know that our founding fathers did not create a constitution that was inclusive of all people. We must address gun violence and police violence in the same stroke, because we know that police violence is gun violence.
Up next, an additional piece to motivate you to show up.
Hello, my name is Chuck Brocha, and I'm the president of Solidarity Strategies, former senior advisor to Bernie Sanders, and author of the book, T.O. Bernie. My story is really unique here in Washington, D.C. I was a father at the age of 19, I've never been to college, and I have a criminal record. Any one of these three should limit my opportunities, but they did not. I worked hard, and I overcame. My story uniquely qualified me to be the architect of the Bernie Sanders 2020 Latino Outreach Operation, where we showed up in neighborhoods early and often. We were culturally competent, and we went right into the community with a narrative about what the future of America should look like. That's why we won over 70% of the Latino vote in Nevada and over 70% of the Latino vote in Iowa, and tripled the turnout of Latinos in Nevada. The key to winning elections is gaining people's trust and persuading them to vote for you. And that's what I need you to do. I need you to look around, find somebody who don't look like you, maybe somebody you've never met, and ask them to get involved. That's how we come together to make sure our voices are heard.
Sometimes getting involved in civic and political life can feel like being a goalie where everyone's taking a shot at you. But we're now going to hear from an actual goalie, two-time gold medalist and World Cup champion Hope Solo, who has spent her career on and off the field fighting for equity.
Hi everyone, I'm Versha Sharma, the senior correspondent at NowThis, and I'm thrilled to be joined today by Hope Solo, legendary goalkeeper, World Cup and Olympic champion. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. So Hope, first I wanted to talk about the fact that it's 2020 and gender pay equity is still an issue that we're dealing with. It's something that you've been fighting for a long time. So I would love to hear where you think we are right now and how far we've come.
I get this question all the time, and it's very tough to answer. It shouldn't be complicated, but it is a complicated issue. We shouldn't be still fighting for equality, not gender equality, not human rights equality, not overall equality, but we still are. And what I've seen is that there's been this isn't very hopeful for everybody out there, but I've seen that there's been more of a digression and not a progression of gender equality. It's a popular topic, yes, and everybody is talking about it, everybody is wearing t-shirts about it, everybody is, doing things that are creating the conversation, and creating the conversation is a very important starting point. But we have had this conversation now for decades upon decades upon decades. So I'm at the point now where I'm frustrated, I'm angry, I'm mad, because I want to see real change. I want to see real progression, change that is everlasting, that we can pass on for generations to come. So no longer can we just send tweets out. No longer can we just wear a shirt. No longer can we just take a knee. We need systemic change that is lasting. We have to get into the trenches. We have to work hard. We have to read legal documents. We have to push for changes of law through Congress, through the Supreme Courts, through the Senate. We have to know the law ourselves in order to educate others. So right now it just feels like we're in this time of popularity. And trust me, I believe that there's some good for social media, and we have to use our voices. And I always say that silence never changed the world. But right now it's time for more than talk. It's time for action, and it's time for sacrifice.
Other athletes that we've spoken to in this program have talked about the collaborative efforts that we've seen increasingly from leagues and teams and athletes. What is your thought on whether individually whether individual athletes can be effective versus the organizational backing and support that they may need. I'm just curious how you think that breaks down.
I really know that their teams and organizations and individuals are making a difference. And I think, some of those difference makers like LeBron James, he can use his influence, he can use the backing financially that he has as a male athlete. That's also a positive that he does have in comparison to a lot of female athletes. So he is able to create more change through that type of investment backing. Most importantly, however, when you look at the young kids and they see athletes stepping up and caring about the world around them, caring about the people around them, I think that can also create generational change, which is a positive. So there is that influence, which I think is incredible that we can use our platforms in social media for. But like I said, I always want to see more. I'm all in 100% of the time, whether it's on the field or off the field.
Yeah, that's very clear. And I think you're completely right. LeBron is not just talking the talk, but he's turning basketball arenas into places where people can go to vote, which I just think is incredible. Now, I'm also curious what you think. It's been great to see that the women's soccer team in recent years has been getting the increasing attention and recognition that they so deserve, and that they have deserved since you were playing. So, what do you think about the way that conversation's been going, and still in the fact that 2020, certain politicians or people are saying that athletes shouldn't talk about everything that you're talking about right now?
So first and foremost, as an athlete, absolutely, hands down, you have to be a fierce competitor. But that doesn't mean we're only athletes. That doesn't mean that we're not educated. That doesn't mean that we don't care about the world around us. And I think we have the ability to use our voices in a number of different ways. So for anybody to say, oh, just dribble the ball or just, look pretty and stand in goal, it's sexist, it's just naive. And I think everybody should be trying to make the world better around them, whether you are a pipe fitter or whether you're an athlete or whether you work for Congress. So it doesn't matter what you do. I think we should all aspire to do more.
Other gender-based issues that we've seen are emerging as well in sports media, right? You're an activist, you're an athlete, and you've also been branching out into commentary and media. So what have you seen in your experience there that are maybe gender-based issues that people should know more about?
Luckily for me, I've had a great experience in my role as a commentator. And I say that because my first commentating job was doing men's football, men's soccer. So I worked overseas and I commentated the Men's World Cup. So I've been used, right now I'm one of the main commentators for La Liga, which is the men's Spanish league and one of the best leagues in the world. And I work for BN, and at BN, oftentimes we have 2 female commentators or analysts for the men's game and only 1 male. So I've lucked out. But then I look at other networks and you never really see female analysts. You see the female host, but you never see a woman breaking down the men's game. And you see it oftentimes in the women's game. So you see it all the time. It does drive me crazy, but I have been fortunate enough to break into the men's game. I think it's probably because I'm always really opinionated. I think it's probably because maybe the ratings go up because of my opinions. But I have been lucky, but in no way, shape, or form is it equal in the commentating world.
All right, as we close out, you're obviously very busy on a number of fronts, but what is next for you?
Oh, goodness, we are in the trenches, as always. It was unfortunate that the U.S. Women's National Team's class action suit got dismissed under summary judgment, which was, when I said there's been a digression, not a progression, is because there's a class action. There was a lot of media publicity behind it and a lot of public support. There was a lot of marketing support as well, advertising support. Advertisers pulled out of U.S. soccer. It goes to the judge, and it got dismissed without a hearing. It got dismissed under summary judgment. To me, that's a problem. This is a huge issue. It's federal law, the Equal Pay Act, and Title VII. It's not opinion related, it's fact based, and it got dismissed. I fortunately filed my federal lawsuit for the Equal Pay Act before the team, about 8 months before the U.S. Women's National Team, and mine is still the last one standing in federal court. So I still have my day in court when it comes to equal pay. But we're going to continue the fight. That's what we do day in and day out.
Hope, thank you so much for your time and for all of the work that you do. We appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Aspen Ideas Show Up is generously underwritten by the Bezos Family Foundation.
Up next, an additional piece to motivate you to show up.
I'm Tania Israel, a professor of counseling psychology at UC Santa Barbara. 30 years ago, I started a group to bring together pro-choice and pro-life people for dialogue. Having worked in a clinic that provided abortions, I felt it was crucial for women to have access, but I also wanted to approach pro-life advocates with something other than frustration. These conversations were transformational for me. They didn't change my feelings about reproductive rights, but they did change my feelings about people who disagree with me about it. Flash forward to the 2016 election. It was clear our country was divided. With insights from the abortion dialogue and my professional expertise, I created the flowchart that will resolve all political conflict in our country, as well as a workshop that's drawn hundreds of attendees and a book that offers evidence-based skills and strategies. I am now more optimistic than ever that we can bridge the political divide to strengthen our connections and our democracy. My experience, backed by science, indicates the key is to listen to each other.
To transition us from the discussions with experts to your discussions and interactive session, we are going to hear a piece written specifically for Aspen Ideas Show Up by artist and performer Akinyemi.
I had a homie and he never voted before. I guess he was scared of the polls. Don't know what a ballot is, he feeling out of it, he never planning the show. And now I was letting him know, voting is more than the president, House of Representatives, you can edit them, choosing the DA, the judges, the senators. I said make them look more like you, tell them look you in the eye, no bird's eye view. Voting is the least you could do. I ain't here telling you to do something that's unreasonable, I'm just speaking the truth. Take what you needed, pay it for it while I'm daily receiving. Catch me outside sitting and reading, freedom is what I believe in. Let's take this time to educate you. I'm talking November 3rd, I'm talking about legislature. Breathe in, I said, it's okay, it's gonna be a good day. I just voted and it's great, yeah, I'll say.
This may seem like the end of our first day of Show Up, but really, the interactive fun is just getting started.
If what you saw tonight left you motivated or empowered or even angry, then the next step starts right now. Part 2 of our evening is an hour of interactive discussion where you and other motivated citizens talk about opportunities to get active and work through strategies to make change. There's still time to sign up. Visit the website on your screen to do that right now. If you are already registered, you'll have gotten an email from our team with the URL you should visit. In the next 60 short minutes, you'll have more of the tools you need to start really showing up for your neighbors and your country.
Part of showing up is also sharing feedback, helping to close that loop. You'll see on screen a code that will take you to a survey. Give us 5 more minutes of your time and give us your feedback. We'll also send that link via email. So much of what you've experienced today is going to shape how we build more programming to help more people remake our democracy for everybody.
I'm Zinhle Essamuah, and on behalf of Aspen Ideas and NowThis, I want to thank you for being a part of Day 1 and invite you to show up tomorrow at 7 p.m. Eastern.
Join us tomorrow night, the same time, 7 p.m. Eastern, when we'll feature more discussions and stories about showing up with Yellow Pain, a rapper with a mission to inspire his community to show up. We'll continue the conversation about showing up for gender equality with powerhouse Tina Tchen, the CEO of Time's Up, and we'll also hear from more young trailblazers showing up for their communities.